So back when I was a mystery diagnosis still, I knew I didn't have cerebral palsy, but stuff was still going on with my body, and I was in with doctors trying to get tests and exams to figure out what exactly was happening. There were a couple lies that I had just tucked in the back of my mind to whip out anytime a stranger might ask me what was going on with my walk or my body. And the reason I did this is because it can be really awkward talking about this mystery diagnosis. I was embarrassed to talk about it because I had let my body deteriorate for so long. And also it was just, I don't know, kind of uncomfortable having to share that, yeah, it's been getting worse. And I'd had a couple scenarios where I was the negative Nancy to the person who was saying something positive. And it's one of those things where like you're conscious of it, your brain is telling you like, no, don't say that. And it just like comes out anyway. And it's like, oh, you can't take it back. And so in order to avoid awkward situations and just to kind of wrap things up and get things out as quick as possible without having to actually engage in a conversation with anyone, I had a few lies tucked up my sleeve. I mean, these weren't the kinds of things where I thought I would ever actually employ them. It was just sort of imaginary situations that I had cooked up on my own that just kind of made me feel a little bit better about what was going on with me. So here are 3 of those scenarios that we had. 2 of them never got used, but one actually did come in handy. So first off, I had it planned that if there was ever a kid, maybe age like 10 to teenage years, ask me what was going on with me, my response would be kind of a cryptic, look, all I'm gonna say is don't do drugs. And obviously this is a true statement. It's misleading for sure because I didn't do drugs and drugs were not the cause of what was going on with me. But I figure, that's enough. It's something kids should hear, maybe get a little fear in them. And funny enough, I was hanging out with a friend of a friend who was asking me why I walked the way that I did. And I shared the truth with him that I really didn't know and I'm trying to figure it out. And he ended up sharing that he had friends from his hometown who walked the same way that I did, very similar. And it was because they had severely abused drugs when they were younger. And he kind of worded it in a way that was almost like accusatory of me. And so that was another awkward situation of having to like defend that, oh, I'm not a former drug addict. So yeah, that was fun. Another scenario that I had planned was if this was like an adult or something like that, again, always just a stranger, someone I wouldn't have like a relationship with. There's no need to really engage, no desire to engage because I'm never going to see him again. But the reasoning that I would give to a random adult would be to just say, I have MS. And this is not a horrible thing. Well, I mean, it's lying, but it's not outlandish of a lie either because multiple sclerosis was one of the first things that my doctor had actually rolled out. So the fact that I've got a doctor thinking, hey, these symptoms look like MS, it didn't seem too unusual for me to just throw that out there. And I feel like MS is one of those diseases where it's like people know it enough that they're gonna kind of like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. But not so much that they're really gonna wanna try to engage with me in any sort of way about what's going on. So I figured that would be a safe one. But again, I never had to use this. The third one though is something that came in handy. So I had always kind of thought like, yeah, how about just make up a lie about like a cool accident or something like that. And I shared this idea with a friend of mine. We were going to this charity fundraiser gala in Paris, very formal, very fancy. There was going to be a lot of dancing and drinking and interacting with tons of other people because there are these massive tables, you're there with strangers and whatnot. And so I just knew, I was like, someone is going to ask and I don't want to talk about it. And so I told my friend that if anyone did ask, that the lie that we were going to tell was that I'd been in a horseback riding accident. Now, this was ingrained in a little bit of truth because in high school I had taken a semester of horseback riding. So I at least knew about horses. I could kind of have a conversation on the topic if need be. And yeah, it was just a good way to kind of brush things off and not get into like an awkward situation, have anyone feel bad for me or anything like that. It's like, oh, well, that's kind of cool, especially horseback riding, because I feel like it's kind of one of those things not a lot of people do. It's sort of impressive. And I feel like you kind of have an assumption of, oh, if they're good enough to get into an accident horseback riding, then they must be pretty good, right? You're not going to be just walking and get into an accident on a horse. Well, you could, but I didn't. And so we made it through our whole night and no one asked a single thing until we are walking down the hill to get to the taxi stand. And I was a good clip in front of my friend. She was back walking with someone that she just met leaving the party. It was this guy and his date. And I could overhear him say like, you know, what's going on with your friend? Is she okay? Because a lot of times, like at that point, obviously I've got a guy who thinks I'm walking the way that I did because of drugs, but another thing that people would confuse it with is just like completely being overserved. So that was kind of his assumption, it sounded like. And you know, my friend, true to form, she had agreed, yes, we're going with this lie, except she ended up one-upping it for me and telling the guy that I was injured due to a horseback riding accident that occurred when I was breaking in a filly. Never happened. That was definitely a good one, but he was just impressed. So it went from kind of like that side eye of what's wrong with your friend to holy cow, like that is so cool. Like I've never known anyone who's done that before. That's so awesome. So I went from being the weirdo who's walking like she's drunk to this really cool person who got injured breaking a filly. So yeah, it made me feel a lot better than having to be this mystery diagnosis. And while lying is never necessarily good, I'm not going to say that I condone it. It certainly worked in my favor that night, I thought, and yeah, no regrets on that end.